So it turns out that so-called rich countries are facing a big problem. People are not having kids. Not enough, at least. On average, women need to have 2 children to keep things balanced, but they're only having 1, or none at all. This issue comes down to the fertility rate, or simply the average number of kids a woman is expected to have in her lifetime. When that number's too low, it means more people are passing away in these countries than being born, and that can destroy the economy. Think of a rich country – the US, Germany, Japan. Great! Pick any wealthy nation you like, and I can promise you one thing – its fertility rate is below 2.1, and that's a problem. Here's why. Meet Mary and John, and over here we've got Jack and Lucy. That's 4 people total. Now, both couples get married. Mary and John have 2 kids, but Jack and Lucy only have 1. Now, what does that mean? Simple math, we're down by 1 person. And if this keeps happening, generation after generation, the population starts to shrink. The situation gets pretty scary when we zoom in on certain countries. Take Spain, Italy, or Poland. These countries have some of the lowest fertility rates in the European Union, with women there having, on average, just 1 kid. And that's a big problem, because it drags down entire economies. Picture a triangle, young people and workers at the bottom and the elderly at the top. In many rich countries, that bottom part is shrinking fast, with fewer babies being born each year. So it's like this triangle is flipping upside down. Fewer young folks and workers, but more and more older people. With fewer workers and more retirees, the economy struggles to stay balanced. It's like the domino effect. Fewer people working means fewer people paying taxes. Meanwhile, the older population at the top keeps growing. And now we have a way bigger group depending on pensions and stuff like Social Security. So we're left asking, who's going to pay for all these retirements? Now, some countries are in hotter water than others, and South Korea is really feeling the heat. They've got more and more people getting older, while fewer and fewer babies are being born. In fact, they've got the lowest fertility rate in the world. In 2023, it hit rock bottom, 0.72 births per woman. Now, personally, I don't know how you can have 3/4 of a kid, but hey, that's statistics for you. Meanwhile, if things keep going like this, Korea's population could shrink by half by 2100. Over the last 20 years, their authorities have invested at the equivalent of $286 billion in this issue, and they've rolled out a bunch of incentives to turn things around. First up, pocket money. If a married couple in Korea decides to have their first kid, the government hands over about $10,000 split into monthly payments to help out. While that might sound impressive, it's only about 3 times the average monthly wage. And in Seoul, one of the most expensive cities in the world, that doesn't go very far. Next, a home. Paying rent in Seoul is insane, but the government doesn't want people to leave the capital because of it. So they're stepping in. Recently, they've promised to give families around $300 a month to help with housing, until the kid turns 2. Then again, $300 seems great, but it only covers about 11% of the rent for a 3-bedroom apartment in the city center. And last but not least, health care. Hospital bills are covered, but the couple must be married, on paper and everything. South Korea came up with all this to fix the problem. Otherwise, their population might get older, poorer, and more dependent on others for care. But when you think about it, all these incentives really come down to one thing – giving out cash. Even so, their demographic problem hasn't gotten any better, so the authorities had to come up with more creative solutions, like offering jobs with flexible hours for parents with kids under 5. And they can borrow things like toys or strollers from the government, totally for free. So, why don't women want to become mothers? There's a bunch of reasons. But one of the most important is work. Women are getting more education and grabbing more opportunities in the job market than ever before. But a lot of jobs have crazy hours, with people working late every single day. So many women get stuck in that cycle, waking up early, going to work, coming home late, and sleeping. Then it all starts over the next day. They don't have time to meet a partner, and even less time to raise someone. In fact, education in general is one of the biggest reasons why birth rates are dropping. Spending so many years in school, then in college, means women are pushing back the age they have their first kid. Once they finish their education, they often want to focus on work and building their careers before starting a family. So they're not becoming moms in their teens or early 20s anymore. And by the time they hit 30, things aren't much better. Sure, they might finally land a stable job, but most employment policies still don't offer enough support for childcare. But it's not only education. Younger generations are getting delayed in, well, everything. I mean, it's way harder for them to tick off all the adulting boxes, like having a well-paying job or buying a nice house. And these things are usually a big part of whether people decide to start a family or not. Another reason people aren't having kids: putting a new human into this world is expensive and time-consuming. The average childcare costs in Australia, for example, have gone up faster than inflation. School tuition, even for public schools, takes a big chunk out of parents' budgets. Think about it: computers, uniforms, field trips, extracurricular activities – all that adds up to the cost of financing someone's education. Over 13 years, parents spend over $80,000 on public education. And if we're talking about private schools, that number jumps up to almost $350,000. And don't worry, these costs are just for one kid. Now imagine having 2 or 3. So what is the solution? Well, there are 2 ways to tackle the problem that don't involve pushing the population to have more kids. Nations can keep their population healthier and employed longer, like what Singapore is doing. They're putting a lot of effort into raising the retirement age, offering midlife training, and encouraging companies to hire older workers, like those over 69. Another way is to encourage people from other countries to come in, especially young ones who are ready to work. That's, for example, the strategy Canada uses. Now, if the goal is really to get women to have more kids, a lot of countries use the baby bonus strategy, basically giving money and benefits to families, just like South Korea does. The problem is that some experts say it is pretty ineffective, as financial incentives don't address the complexity of the issue. For them, what these wealthy countries need to do is offer better career and housing opportunities for young people, like giving incentives for companies to offer more flexible hours or work-from-home options for young parents. They also need to push strategies to lower the cost of housing, especially in big cities. Plus, they need to focus more on the aging population, using technological innovations to support them. That would help not just parents, but families as a whole. So, what do you think? So, you're walking along a wide street of a huge megacity and feel as if you've suddenly been transported into a post-apocalyptic movie. Everything around is eerily quiet. The high-rise buildings surrounding you look new but deserted. There are no cars and no people. Has doomsday taken them all? Those might be your thoughts if you visited Ordos Kambashi, a new city in China's Inner Mongolia, a few years ago. The place rose in a desert rapidly in less than a decade. It has wonderful architecture, lots of public spaces, and rows upon rows of fresh new houses. But the place didn't get famous because of it all. Instead, the city became known for something it didn't have: people. The media started calling it a ghost town. They claimed it was empty, with no businesses or life. Well, I've got so many questions here, and the main one is, why didn't people want to live there? Now there's a curious twist to this story. The thing is, news stories, which describe Ordos Kambashi as a ghost town and generally a failure, began in 2009. Some reporters visited the place and figured out that not so many people lived there. At that time, the city indeed looked like a megalopolis after a terrible disaster. But the problem was, the reporters didn't ask local officials why the city was so empty, and they missed a key point. By that time, the city had only been under construction for 6 years. It hadn't even been finished yet. True, there weren't many people living there when they called the place a ghost city, but the reporters didn't know the full story and exaggerated the facts to impress readers. You want to know the real story? Ordos wasn't a ghost town built for nobody. It was just a city still in the making. The city's original plan was to build a comfortable place for 1 million people by 2023. but some unpleasant changes in the coal market occurred. Sadly, it was Ordos's main source of income, so the plan was scaled down to about 300,000 people. In his first 5 years, Ordos Kambashi got a whole downtown with offices, a world-class museum, and an opera house. It even had a cool library. It was shaped like books standing on a shelf. But even though the place already looked like a city, in reality, it was still under construction. It wasn't a ghost town. It was more like a construction site. Early on, nobody lived in Ordos Kambashi full-time since there weren't enough schools, hospitals, and shops. People went there to work and then returned to their hometowns at the end of the day. It took a few more years to build these facilities, so no wonder that, at first, the population of the city was small. Ordos isn't a true ghost town these days, just as our next destination. We're traveling all the way to Africa to a massive new residential area, Nova Cidade de Colomba. You can find it 18 miles away from Angola's capital, Luanda. The city has 750 apartment buildings, more than a dozen schools, and over 100 retail spaces. The project cost $3.5 billion, more than I make in a year, and was supposed to house up to 500,000 people. They used to show Colomba in glossy promotional videos. In those mini-movies, happy families lived far from the crowded, chaotic districts of Luanda. But there was a catch. The people in the videos were not real residents, they were actors. Because nearly a year after the first 2,800 apartments had gone on sale, only 220 were sold. If you had come to visit Colomba in the first years of its existence, it would have been eerily quiet. You would have seen the rows of colorful apartment buildings standing empty, closed shutters, deserted balconies. There would have been barely any cars and hardly anyone around. Most of the shops would have been vacant, except for the hypermarket at the entrance. Even if people had lived there would have been nowhere to buy basic things, like food. There's no mystery here. Apartments in Colombo were priced between $120,000 and $200,000, and that was way far beyond the reach of most Angolans. 2/3 of them live on less than $2 a day. It was also incredibly difficult to get a bank loan. Even with new laws designed to help people get mortgages, many Angolans couldn't afford the down payments, even those with decent-paying jobs. Luckily, sometime later, prices of the smallest units were reduced from $125,000 to $70,000. As a result, the population increased to 80,000 residents by July 2015. In 2019, the population was already 129,000. As for 2024, Colomba has become a desired destination for middle-class Angolans. Meanwhile, it's time to visit the next place on our list of post-apocalyptic megacities. Imagine walking down cobblestone streets with lines of charming old-style homes on each side. You pass Edwardian houses and Victorian terraces. Oh look, a fish and chip shop over there, and iconic red phone boxes. It looks like a scene straight out of England. But here's the twist. You're only 40 minutes away from downtown Shanghai. Huh? The thing is, Shanghai tried to give its residents a taste of the world. And back in 2001, they started an ambitious project called One City, 9 Towns. The idea was to relieve terrible overcrowding in the city by building 9 suburban communities. Each of them was designed to look like a different Western country. One of those is Thames Town, a little slice of England. Over $330 million was spent creating this mini England from scratch. They even imported actual lampposts from the UK and built a replica of a famous Gothic church from Bristol. But it wasn't just about England. Other towns were inspired by Germany, Spain, the Netherlands, and even Canada. So, what happened? Well, the houses in Thames Town sold fast, but most of the middle-class people they were meant for couldn't afford them. Instead, wealthy buyers swooped in, getting them as investments or second homes. And now Thames Town and most of the other 9 towns remain empty. The area has turned into a ghost town, with beautiful houses and shops, but no one to live there. Our next destination isn't too far away. Welcome to one of the strangest capital cities in the world, Naypyidaw. Now, imagine a city built from scratch right in the middle of rice paddies and sugarcane fields. In 2005, Myanmar showed the world its brand new capital, named Naypyidaw, which means the seat of the king. The rumor has it, the city cost up to $4 billion to build. This surreal city is 6 times the size of New York City. Everything there is supersized. Roads have up to 20 lanes and stretch as far as the eye can see. There's a safari park and at least 2 golf courses. Unlike in the rest of the country, there's reliable electricity there, and many restaurants have free fast Wi-Fi. But there's one big issue: the place is weirdly empty. It even got international attention because of its odd layout and ghost town vibe. If you look closer, though, you might spot pairs of street cleaners in neon green vests. They're walking up and down those roads, sweeping streets that are already spotless. But what's the point if no one wants to live there? People say it's boring, expensive, and has no infrastructure for life. The whole place feels like an extreme test of if you build it, they will come. The test the city seems to have failed. Let's fly back to the USA now. There, in Pennsylvania, you'll see a town on fire. It's Centralia, a near ghost town. Since 1962, a coal fire has been burning underneath this small town and is likely to keep burning for the next 250 years. It all started with an attempt to clean up the local landfill. It accidentally ignited the coal seams underground. Over the years, people abandoned their homes as the fire created dangerous sinkholes and filled the air with poisonous gas, such as carbon monoxide. In 1992, the state had taken over most of the land, leaving just a handful of residents. They agreed to give up their property when they passed away. Centralia was doomed, and the fire is still burning beneath its empty streets. So, tell me, which of the ghost cities would you like to visit? Tell us in the comments.
You're chillin' in Hawaii, on the island of Oahu. A friend calls you up. Hey, I'm here too. Meet me in Maui. Great, but how do you get there? Your first thought is probably to take a ferry, but that's impossible. Hawaii is a pretty unique place. It's the most expensive state to live in. It has its own official language besides English. And it's the only American state made up entirely of islands. Hawaii has a total of 137 islands. 8 are the main ones, but only 6 are open to tourists. And the distance between those islands is probably bigger than you'd expect. For example, traveling from Oahu to the Big Island is around 185 miles, which is about the same distance as Chicago to Indianapolis. You might be surprised that you can't make that trip by boat. In fact, the only ferry system that actually takes passengers in Hawaii runs between Maui and Lanai. That's it. So your only option is to travel between islands is by plane. Honestly, it's a little surprising, especially considering how many people visit Hawaii every year. Tourism pretty much drives their economy, and in the first 8 months of 2024 alone, over 6 million people visited its beautiful beaches. Knowing that, we would expect Hawaii to set up a good ferry system to make it easier for visitors to get around. Just like in Greece. This would probably boost tourism even more, bringing more money to the state. But believe me, authorities and private companies also know that. In fact, they've already tried it. Ferries were a big way of getting around in Hawaii from the 19th century up until the 1950s. Since then, there have been a few attempts to bring back a ferry service, but unfortunately, they have all failed. One of the biggest attempts was the Hawaii Super Ferry, which aimed to provide a fast, affordable boat service between islands. It could carry almost 900 passengers and even allow them to bring their own cars along. The trial run started in 2007, and people were excited, but it turned into a big fiasco. A bunch of legal and environmental issues came up, like concerns about the impact on marine life, especially whales. The courts decided the ferry didn't go through the proper environmental reviews, and that caused a lot of trouble. By 2009, after tons of protests and setbacks, they had to shut it down. If a project like this comes up again, it will probably fail one more time. and there are a few reasons why it's almost impossible to set up a regular ferry system there. Let's start by talking about Hawaii's rough waters. They are deep and wild. Take the Alenoiaha Channel, for example. It's a 30-mile stretch that separates Maui from the Big Island. Its name means Great Billow Smashing Channel, and it lives up to that. It's over 6,000 feet deep, making it one of the most dangerous stretches of water on Earth. The wind there is also super strong, the fastest in Hawaii's coastal waters. But it's not any easier in the rest of the archipelago. The whole region gets hit by storms from the Pacific up north, sending big waves crashing into the islands and making the waters rough and unpredictable. Swells can come from 3, 4, or even more directions, making the sea feel really choppy. Someone who's not used to taking ferry boats would definitely find that, well, uncomfortable, to say the least. To deal with rough seas like this, the ferries have to be really big and strong. But that also makes them more expensive and harder to run than the ones in places like Alaska or Washington State. Another reason it's so tough to set up this system today has to do with marine life. A big ship moving through the shallower waters when docking could really damage the local ecosystem. And there's also the problem that the sea routes are also the migration paths of many sea animals, like humpback whales and spinner dolphins. Not to mention, ferry services can make it easier to spread harmful plants and animals, what experts call invasive species. See, Hawaii's ecosystem is super unique because it's been isolated out in the middle of the Pacific. When we talk about plants and animals that are native to Hawaii, we mean they got there on their own, no humans involved. They arrived with the help of waves, wind, or even birds flying over. But events like these are super rare, so for over 70 million years, their plants and animals didn't have to deal with outside competition. That's made them really fragile. So, when new species get brought in by us, it can be a big problem, and they could end up harming the environment. Hawaii's already been battling invasive species like fire ants, coqui frogs, and Meiconia, a fast-growing plant from South America that takes over native forests. People there worry that ferries, which carry cars and cargo between islands, could accidentally spread these invaders even more. Like we mentioned at the beginning of the video, the long distances between their lands don't really help either. For example, if you were to travel from Oahu to the Big Island of Hawaii by boat, it would take around 30 hours, and that's without any stops. The same trip by plane takes about 50 minutes. Ferries that cover long distances are much more expensive, so they need a much bigger demand to make them profitable. On top of that, the state doesn't really have the infrastructure, like enough ports and terminals to support the operations. So setting up new routes is pretty much out of the question. Airplanes, on the other hand, are a different story. The air travel industry in Hawaii is already well established and super competitive. That means flying is still the most practical option in Hawaii. Planes are quick, they don't make you seasick, and are pretty affordable, usually costing around $100 for a round trip. Okay, but what do the locals think about all this? Well, apparently, there isn't a huge demand for residents to commute between the islands all that often. Oahu is the busiest island in Hawaii, with about 70% of the state's population living there. It is where Honolulu, the capital, is located, and where most of the state's business happens. So, people from the other islands usually come over for a specific doctor's appointment or to catch a big concert. And that might happen once or twice a year, no more than that. So, even if people could choose between taking a ferry and a plane for these special occasions, most of them would probably still prefer flying. There are plenty of options between the main island airports. Planes usually start flying around 5 in the morning, and there are flights available every hour until the last one, which is usually at 9 in the evening. If you've been dreaming of going to this paradisiacal place but are worried about spending too much on plane tickets, I have some tips for you. First off, keep in mind that visiting all the main islands in 5 days or less is way too ambitious. So, if you don't have much time to spend there, think about your priorities. Each of the 6 islands open to tourists has its own vibe and activities. But you don't need to visit them all in one trip, and you can save some money by sticking to fewer islands. You can still explore the diversity of the islands by picking 2 that offer a nice contrast to each other. For example, while Oahu has that bustling city energy, Kauai has a much more relaxed vibe. Also, flights in the morning are usually cheaper, and it might be better to fly on a weekday rather than the weekend, although the price difference isn't usually huge. Hopefully these tips will save you some cash while still having an unforgettable island hopping adventure in Hawaii. Don't forget to share this video with a friend who's also dreaming of exploring these amazing islands. People living in Hawaii need to make at least twice the average salary in the rest of the US to live comfortably. Those who aren't ready to pay $5 for a gallon of milk have to look for happiness elsewhere. And year after year, the state makes it to the top lines of the population loss rating. While the local middle class is leaving, Hawaii is turning into a heaven for billionaires. Just 37 of them already own 11% of all the private land in the Aloha state. Larry Ellison, co-founder of the Oracle Corporation, bought 98% of the island of Lanai, including the grocery store, the only gas station, and the community newspaper, all for a nifty sum of $300 million. This makes him the boss and landlord of everyone on the island. Mark Zuckerberg, the Meta founder and CEO, is building a huge compound on Kauai with more than a dozen buildings, at least 30 bedrooms and bathrooms, a tunnel leading to a 5,000 square feet underground bunker, and 11 tree houses connected by intricate rope bridges. The local residents with ancestral rights to this land lost in court and had to put it up for auction. The Malaysian tycoon Kvek Leng Khan owns a third of the island of Molokai through his business empire. Of course, these and some of the world's richest people create new jobs and invest in development projects on the islands. But still, nearly 2/3 of the locals believe that their state is being run for tourists at the expense of the residents. A lot of famous people like to live in Wailea and Makina in Maui because it's peaceful and gives them the privacy they want. Oprah Winfrey has a big house up in the local hills. Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon, reportedly bought a huge house by La Perouse Bay for $78 million. Other famous people who live in Maui include Clint Eastwood, Mick Fleetwood, Jim Carrey, and Alice Cooper. When you visit Maui, you can see a special Hall of Fame display at the airport showing those celebrities. It's supposed to celebrate their ties with the island, but the local people feel like it only highlights the huge gap between the new super wealthy residents and the local people who can barely afford to live there. As the rich and famous keep buying property across Hawaii, home prices continue to rise. It's more expensive to buy a house here than in Washington, D.C. or California. Part of the reason for such high pricing is how the land itself is formed. Hawaii is bigger than most people think, but it's made up of lots of separate islands that are spread far apart. Even though the islands are big, not all of the land can be used to build houses or neighborhoods. Unlike most of the US, which has a lot of flat land and gentle hills, much of Hawaii is made up of steep, rocky mountains and rough terrain. This kind of land is very hard to build on or live on. Because of this, most of the people on Hawaii, about 1 million of them, live on the island called Oahu. The other islands, like the Big Island, have far fewer people. There isn't enough land for everyone, and that makes it hard for people who have lived in Hawaii their whole lives to afford a place to live. Tourism makes up 21% of the state's economy. Most of the visitors come from the United States and Japan. Tourists bring in tons of money, but there's a problem. Depending too much on tourism can be risky for Hawaii. In the recent years, because of we all know what happened, a health rule called the Conditional Sail Order stopped cruise ships from coming to Hawaii for health safety reasons. Many other tourist activities, like visiting beaches or attending events, were also shut down. With fewer visitors, Hawaii earned a lot less money, which hurt the economy. To avoid this problem in the future, Hawaii has been trying to make money in other ways besides tourism. One idea is to invest more in fishing, but this hasn't been easy. At some point, there was too much fishing going on here, and now Hawaii has to bring in 63% of its seafood from other places instead of catching it nearby. There are farms here that grow pineapples, macadamia nuts, coffee, and produce milk. But now, farming isn't as important as it was 100 years ago. Probably one of the reasons is that it's more profitable to sell the land for houses or hotels than to use it for farming. This change made Hawaii even more dependent on tourism and made living in the Aloha State so very pricey. Honolulu is reported to be the 7th most expensive city to live in the US. A family of 4 spends around $8,000 a month here, and a single adult will have to pay, on average, $2,500. Food alone costs around $500 a person for 1 month. Most of the food in Hawaii, about 85 to 90%, comes from faraway places. Since it has to travel more than 2,500 miles to get there, around 1/3 of all the food spoils along the way, especially because Hawaii is warm and humid. This waste makes things more expensive because stores know they'll lose some of their products and charge more to cover their losses. There aren't as many stores competing with each other. If stores don't compete, they have no reason to lower their prices. On top of that, they have to pay a lot for things like rent and electricity, so they raise their prices to make up for those costs. Speaking of electricity, an average bill is around $200, which is almost 90% higher than the national average. Yep, the Aloha State has the highest energy costs in the country. And perhaps that's why people in Hawaii use the least amount of electricity compared to other states. But their bills are still much higher. The main reason is the price per unit of electricity, called a kilowatt hour. 1 unit of electricity costs almost 40 cents. To compare, Utah has the cheapest rate at just 10.91 cents. It's so expensive in Hawaii because most of the electricity comes from oil, and that oil has to be shipped to the islands. Since Hawaii depends so much on oil, energy costs go up and down with oil prices. On top of all that, the income tax is some of the highest in the country. A quarter of all households in Hawaii spent more than their income in 2024. To survive, people used savings and credit cards and cut expenses. They also had to work more hours or get an extra job. They were forced to sell their belongings and borrow money from relatives, banks, or other lenders. Almost half of residents are in the category called Alice, and it has nothing to do with Alice in Wonderland. It means asset-limited, income-constrained, employed. More than 1 in 3 residents lives below the Alice annual income threshold. And then there's also legislation that further complicates things for Hawaii. It says that any goods shipped between places in the US must be carried on ships that are owned, built, and run by Americans. This makes shipping much more expensive because US ships and crews cost a lot more than ships from other countries. Most of the world's ships don't follow these rules because they're registered in countries like Panama. Because of this, Hawaii can still get goods from places like East Asia using cheaper ships, but if they want something from the mainland US, it costs way more money. In fact, this law costs Hawaii over $1 billion every year. This law also makes it really hard for Hawaii to grow businesses because everything is so expensive. The cost of insurance is also going up. This is because the islands are hit by natural disasters like hurricanes and storms more often now. All of this adds up to making life in Hawaii even more expensive. But even despite all that, the state steadily lands high in studies on well-being. Even people who can barely afford a living are mostly happier, or at least less unhappy in Hawaii than in other states. I guess the strong community support, a clean and fantastically beautiful environment, and the ability to have beach parties all year round make up for many hardships. This area might just be the most important spot in America right now, as it is worth over $1 trillion. There's something incredibly valuable hidden right here at Thacker Pass, and it is going to shake things up, not just in Nevada, but in the U.S. economy and its global relations. The McDermott Caldera is a massive area, about 28 miles long by 22 miles wide, stretching across northern Nevada and southern Oregon. It's in Humboldt County, a quiet, rural place with just one main city that's going to change a lot in the next 5 to 10 years. That's because they found white gold there. We're talking about lithium. And to explain why this metal is so important, we need a scale. On one side, we place a chunk of lithium, and on the other, an apple. What do you think will happen? If both have the same volume, the scale is going to tip toward the apple. That's because lithium is super light. Its density is about 0.3 ounces per cubic inch, which makes it the lightest solid you can find at room temperature. Lithium is also extremely reactive. That means it combines with other elements very easily, and it can catch fire just as easily. Mix it with water, fire. Expose it to air, yep, fire again. But when you combine its lightness with its high reactivity, you get a material that's perfect for batteries, like the one powering your smartphone, laptop, or even your electric car. Nevada's been hiding this treasure for about 16 million years. The McDermott Caldera used to be a volcanic hotspot, spewing molten rock and creating a huge lake filled with mineral-rich waters. Over time, that lake dried up, leaving behind thick layers of clay loaded with lithium. Right now, Thacker Pass Mine is sitting on one of the biggest untapped lithium reserves in the world, worth about $1.5 trillion. If everything goes as planned, they expect it to produce about 40,000 tons of high-quality lithium a year. And that's enough to make batteries for up to 800,000 electric cars. Like I mentioned earlier, this metal is the backbone of modern batteries. And with the world racing toward green energy, the demand for lithium is skyrocketing. Since 2020, its price has gone up more than 10 times, making it the most expensive battery metal in the world. That means it's way more expensive than magnesium, nickel, cobalt, and other materials used in rechargeable batteries. Right now, we're using about 1.16 million tons of lithium per year, and roughly 85% of it goes into making batteries, mostly for cars. Between 2030 and 2040, experts think we will need to double the money we're putting into production, from $94 billion to $188 billion. At the same time, investment in batteries will jump by over 200%, reaching $686 billion. Finally, by 2050, the demand for lithium is expected to be more than 10 times higher than what we're producing now. Sorry, I know that's a lot of numbers, but I just want to show how important Thacker Pass will be for the whole world. This mine is going to be key to keeping everything running. I mean, literally, since most of the future demand will be for things like cars, electric bikes, scooters, and renewable energy storage. Nevada could also be the epicenter of a global energy revolution, with the U.S. aiming to cut pollution by 50% by 2030. A big part of that is replacing gas-powered vehicles with electric ones. And to make that happen, America is going to need a whole lot more lithium than it's producing right now. Nowadays, most of the metal used in the United States come from countries like Chile and Argentina. So if America wants to be a leader in this market, it really needs to invest more and more in projects like Thacker Pass. But there's another challenge. Finding lithium in a mine is one thing, but refining it is another story. Just like diamonds are carefully cut and shaped to bring out their sparkle and sold in rings and necklaces, something similar needs to be done with lithium. The raw material that comes from the mines has to be refined into a pure form that can actually be used in things like batteries. And China pretty much dominates this part of the market, and they're responsible for about 75% of global lithium-ion battery production. In other words, it doesn't matter if a country finds this powerful metal on its land, it will probably still need China to help refine it. So, the US is eager to strengthen its supply chain. In fact, they're so excited about this possibility that authorities have invested over $2 billion in loans into the Nevada project. Because of that, Thacker Pass could make the US a leader in lithium production worldwide. If their estimates are right, the McDermott caldera could hold nearly half of the world's known lithium reserves. It would almost double the reserves found in Bolivia's salt flats, for example, which used to hold the record for the world's largest deposit. This discovery is about to change Humboldt County for good. Those quiet streets surrounded by nature will never feel the same again. The mine will need about 2,000 workers who will probably move there from other cities. Those workers will need houses, hospitals, schools for their kids, and all the necessary services. Do you see how it's like a ripple effect? For every person hired to work on the project during construction, 6 more people will get hired in the state to support them. Thacker Pass is also going to have a huge impact on the economy, not just in Nevada, but all across the country. People expect the mine to be active for 35 years, and each year it's expected to generate over $2 billion. But here's the thing. In Thacker Pass, they'll be extracting lithium from clay, and this process has never been done on such a huge scale before. So it's kind of a hit or miss. But if it works, it could completely change the industry. Big question. Who's interested in all this? Well, we've got 3 big companies eyeing the lithium market in the US. First, there's ExxonMobil. The oil giant wants to start producing lithium by 2027, and they have plans to become the top supplier for electric vehicles by 2030. Then there's General Motors, the company behind big car brands like Chevrolet and Cadillac. They're so interested in this business that they agreed to pay $625 million for a 38% stake in Thacker Pass. And finally, Tesla. In 2023, they started building a factory in Texas to process lithium. It's all part of their plan to handle more of their supply chain themselves. Now that you know how important lithium is, you might be wondering, what if we run out? Well, that could happen, since it comes from mining and, just like gold, is a finite resource. But that doesn't mean we'd have to give up smartphones or electric cars. If we ever run out of this metal, we'd probably find new ways to produce batteries. In fact, some experts think thermal batteries could be the next big thing. They store extra energy from renewable resources like wind or solar power, which are very cheap. So they represent a new way of storing energy at a small fraction of the cost. Nowadays, they're primarily used for powering the production of steel, cement, and chemicals. Thermal batteries are also being used to heat and cool large buildings. However, more and more projects are focusing on bringing this technology into private spaces, like houses and apartments. Experts are optimistic that initiatives like these could make thermal batteries as well known as electric batteries, and they might soon become a regular part of our daily lives.
So it turns out that you can't drive between South America and North America, and there's a simple reason for that. There are no roads connecting the 2 continents, not even a rudimentary one. Technically, you could try your luck crossing on foot, but let me tell you, that would be a huge mistake. The region that connects the 2 continents is called the Darian Gap. It stretches across southern Panama's Darian province and the northern part of Colombia. The only land route there is a 60-mile jungle trek. Crossing it can take anywhere from 3 to 10 days. It depends on weather conditions, how much you're carrying, and honestly, just pure luck. Chance plays a big role here, because this isn't some chill, relaxing nature walk. It's a harsh, extreme environment, known for being completely isolated and one of the most dangerous places on Earth. Still, people seem to forget that and go there anyway. Every year, the number of people crossing just keeps growing. In 2014, fewer than 10,000 people crossed the gap. In 2023, that number increased to 520,000. Now, you might be wondering, what are so many people doing in the middle of the two American continents, risking all that danger? Well, that's because the Darian Gap has become a route for refugees migrating to North America. But to get there, they face all kinds of dangers, from insect bites and infections to serious fractures. We're talking about a no-man's land. Since there are no police stations, immigrants must also watch out for thieves. Along the way, they have no choice but to rely on and support each other. Most people start the crossing with at least a tent or tarp, rain boots, water, and some food. But these things get heavy fast, and people normally can't carry enough supplies for the entire journey. At some point, people start drinking river water to avoid dehydration. But the water's full of bacteria and dirt, so it causes intestinal issues. And if things get serious, there's no medical help there. To make this whole scenario even worse, the temperatures are brutal, often hitting over 95 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, a small subset of people who venture through the Darian Gap are hardcore adventurers and travelers looking for a survival experience in the jungle. But this region is no place for a relaxing vacation. A group of tourists who went there in 2023 ended up getting jungle rot, a fungus that affects the feet. The situation got so bad that a woman had to be carried out by the group on the last day because she couldn't walk. No matter how prepared people are for the Darian Gap, in the end, survival mostly comes down to luck. Out there, travelers won't find cities with solid infrastructure where they can crash at a hotel and gear up for the next day. In some spots, they might stumble across basic camps right in the jungle. These camps might offer wooden platforms for tents, bucket showers, toilets, and even plates of chicken and rice. But it all comes at a price. Wi-Fi, for example, might cost $2 an hour, and that seems like a pretty good deal, considering there's no cell phone service on the trail. They pretty much lose all contact with the outside world. Now picture a dense rainforest with steep, muddy terrain. The hiking trail is littered with boulders and tangled with vines, like nature's own tripwires. It climbs sharply over a mountain, becoming a serious challenge even for someone in good physical shape. The area also gets constant heavy rainfall, which can lead to landslides, flash flooding, and extremely muddy conditions. The situation gets so intense that even the t-shirts and faces of those who make the crossing end up covered in mud. They'll also have to cross a lot of fast-moving rivers. A Venezuelan dad who recently went through the area with his 2 kids said their sneakers ripped apart on the very first day. That's how powerful the rivers can be. And they're deep, too. Sometimes the water reaches all the way up to their shoulders. But the dangers in that area aren't recent. For centuries, the Darian Gap was thought to be impossible to cross. The first Europeans who ventured into Latin America saw it as kind of a jungle training school. They totally knew about its dangers, but still, many adventurers tried to make the crossing in the years that followed. In 1854, for example, an expedition disappeared for 49 days in the jungle, battling starvation and exhaustion. Then again, in 1870, a group of 100 men set out to cross it. Even though they were well prepared and carried cutting-edge equipment for the time, they still suffered tremendously during the journey. They had to rely on incredible resilience to survive the challenge. Over the years, people who ventured in often ended up passing away from hunger, thirst, and even drowning in rivers. They also faced the risk of being attacked by dangerous animals like jaguars, white-lipped pecaries, and the fer de lance, a fast, irritable snake that is one of the most venomous out there. The area is also swarming with mosquitoes, which can spread serious health problems. Leaning against trees to rest can also be risky. This jungle is full of spiked chunga palm trees, which are covered in long black spines up to 8 inches long. Unfortunately for us, these spines are covered in all sorts of bacteria. Just brush against a chunga, and you could end up with infected wounds. And yet another danger is getting lost in the dense forest and never finding your way back to safety. These days, though, this risk is a lot lower. Some people have mentioned color-coded markers that help guide travelers and keep them from going the wrong way. If they see blue or green fabric tied to trees, it means keep walking. But if they spot red fabric, that's a sign they're going the wrong way and need to turn around quickly. Since there are so many dangers, why not just build a road through the Darian Gap? While it might seem like a good idea, building a road connecting Panama and Colombia isn't really that simple. The Darian Gap has a humid climate, tough terrain, and constant rainfall, which means any attempt to build a functional road would be highly challenging and super expensive. Even though there have been previous attempts to fill in the gap. See, there's a huge road system called the Pan-American Highway, which stretches all the way from Alaska to the southern tip of Argentina. Nowadays, this highway hits a roadblock right at the Darian Gap. But it wasn't supposed to be like this, as the original idea was for the road to go through there. Leaders from Latin American countries tried to make this plan happen in the 70s, and then again in the 90s. But a lot of people were against it, mainly because they wanted to protect the local communities and the rainforest. Since the Darian Gap is mostly untouched by humans, it's one of the most biodiverse places on the planet. It's believed that 1 in 5 species are endemic to the region, meaning they only exist in that specific area, like the Darian pocket gopher and the slatty slender mouse opossum. A road would have really damaged the ecosystem in the area, so the plans were scrapped. Eventually, an alternative was created to travel by sea. At least 2 companies started a ferry service connecting the 2 countries. However, the business wasn't profitable, and they ended up shutting down. Not long ago, Panama decided to close the Darian Gap route. Now they're sealed off with barbed wire fencing. It might just be a matter of time before other routes are created. But if you are an adventurer looking to visit South America, it's probably not best to wait for that. Traveling by plane to Colombia will always be a much safer option.
I guess it's no surprise that it's not that easy to just hop on a plane and literally fly to the South Pole, aka Antarctica. Sure, there are airports down there, but they're not really set up for commercial flights. So most people go to Punta Arenas International Airport in southern Patagonia, Chile, and then take a boat if they want to see some penguins. But not only is it hard to fly there, it's even harder to fly over there. When you're cruising at 30,000 feet, you probably don't think much about what's happening below. But it's pretty unusual for flights to go directly over the South Pole, and planes flying across Antarctica are quite rare too. Technically, it is possible. I've already mentioned that there are airports there. But even so, the infrastructure down there is still super limited. There simply aren't enough airports or refueling stations to support regular commercial flights, making it tricky to operate in such a remote area. Plus, there are only a handful of specialized cargo and transport flights that go in and out, and they exist to cater to those few folks who actually live in Antarctica. Then there's the weather that drives up the costs. The simplest example is that the pilots there need special training, which costs money, which is all because of the weather. Another hurdle is something called ETOPS. These rules dictate how far twin-engine planes can fly from an airport. Since there are so few airports in Antarctica, it's tough for pilots to stick to these regulations. Historically, ETOPS made it next to impossible to fly close to or over the South Pole, while flights over land have plenty of airports to choose from. Antarctica is a whole different ballgame. These days, some aircraft can fly up to 330 minutes or, in rare cases, even 370 minutes from an airport. But even with those extended limits, certain parts of the airspace above Antarctica are still off-limits. Still, in the grand scheme of things, that might not be a huge deal. The most curious of you must have Googled that already and found out that there really are Antarctic airways. Please do not judge fast, and don't say I wasn't right saying how hard it was to fly to the South Pole. Let me break it down for you. Antarctic Airways advertise as the world's most exclusive transcontinental flight, but don't think you can just waltz in and book a ticket anytime. For starters, Antarctic Airways mostly operates flights to King George Island from December to March, so it's not all year round. But there are many more reasons why these flights are unique. If you dig into their website, you'll find you've got two choices: a full day in Antarctica or an overnight adventure. Prices kick off at $5,500 for a day trip and go up to $6,500 for an overnight stay. And if you're considering a private charter, get ready to shell out a pretty penny. It's rumored to start at around $125,000. Sure, that's a steep price compared to your average cruise ship crossing the Drake Passage, but here's the thing. It's about 20 times faster. A cruise ship takes 2 days from Chile, while Antarctic Airways gets you there in just 2 hours. Air travel to Antarctica is pretty limited, likely due to the high costs, limited seating, and the logistical challenges that come with flying to such a remote location. Plus, flights can often be delayed because of bad weather. Most travelers opt for a quick day trip or an overnight stay on King George Island, usually aboard smaller Beechcraft King Air 300 aircraft. The experience typically includes a stroll to a research station and a boat ride to see nearby penguin colonies, but that's just scratching the surface of what Antarctica has to offer. But once you're aboard Antarctic Airways, you'll see it's just like a regular flight on a smaller plane. You'll be served meals that have received some pretty good reviews. There are even photos floating around online showcasing the food, and honestly, it looks awesome. Those who've experienced it say it's luxurious yet unpretentious. You'll get a mix of meats and cheeses, plus treats like tiramisu, salmon salad, a single after-eight chocolate, and a selection of quality street candies. Today, everything may seem cool and safe, but back in the day, there were some pretty tragic events. On November 28, 1979, Air New Zealand Flight 901 tragically collided with Mount Erebus on Ross Island, Antarctica. Unfortunately, all 237 passengers and 20 crew members aboard lost their lives that day. Since 1977, Air New Zealand had been running regular sightseeing flights over Antarctica. This particular flight took off from Auckland Airport in the morning, with plans to spend several hours exploring the stunning Antarctic landscape before heading back to Auckland via Christchurch that evening. Initially, the inquiry into the incident pointed the finger at pilot error. However, growing public concern led to the establishment of a Royal Commission of Inquiry for a deeper investigation. The commission found that the crash had been primarily due to a change in the flight path coordinates made the night before, which the flight crew hadn't been informed about. As a result, instead of being guided by the computer down McMurdo Sound, as they were led to believe, the aircraft was mistakenly redirected toward Mount Erebus. In a way, this flight looks like modern one-day Antarctic tours. Flight 901 was marketed as a unique sightseeing adventure, complete with a knowledgeable Antarctic guide who highlighted various scenic spots and landmarks through the plane's public address system, while passengers enjoyed a low-altitude tour of McMurdo Sound. These flights operated as day trips, taking off from New Zealand and returning on the same day. The plane departed from Auckland International Airport at 8 a.m., aiming to land in Antarctica, with a scheduled return to Christchurch International Airport by 7 p.m. The total journey covered about 5,360 miles, including a 45-minute stop in Christchurch for refueling and crew changes before completing the final 464 miles back to Auckland, arriving at 9 p.m. Back in November 1979, tickets for these flights were priced at $359 per person, which is over $2,150 in today's money. Anyway, this tragedy isn't the reason why planes don't fly over the South Pole. The real culprits are weather, ETOPS regulations, and of course, penguins. Yep, those cool, friendly little creatures. Friendly, at least according to researchers. With no natural predators on land, all of them are in the water. They're not really afraid of people and actually seem to enjoy our company. The South Pole is completely uninhabited and packed with penguins, making it pretty tricky to build anything down there. By the way, the North Pole actually allows planes to fly over it. Not too long ago, there were direct flights from Copenhagen to both LA and Tokyo, operated by SAS, and they cruised right over the North Pole. Other airlines joined in too. For example, Emirates ran a flight from Dubai to LA that took the same route. The difference in air traffic between the two poles mainly comes down to where people live and how much land there is. Roughly 88 to 90% of the world's population hangs out in the Northern Hemisphere, while only about 10 to 12% call the Southern Hemisphere home. Most folks in the South are clustered around the equator in places like Indonesia, Central Africa, and Brazil. When it comes to flights heading to the South Pole, options are pretty limited. You mainly have routes connecting New Zealand and Australia, parts of southern South America, and a few spots in southern Africa, especially South Africa. There aren't really any direct flights over the South Pole, though some flights can get close to Antarctica. One possible route could connect Auckland, New Zealand to Cape Town, South Africa, but there aren't any scheduled flights for that right now. The few flights that came close to Antarctica are operated by Qantas and LATAM Airlines, linking Australia with Buenos Aires and Santiago de Chile. In 2021, Qantas took a long detour over parts of Antarctica on a flight from Buenos Aires to Darwin, and in July 2023, they adjusted a route closer to the continent to dodge some fierce headwinds on a trip from Santiago to Sydney.
Imagine you're driving across a bridge to visit a friend. The next day, you get in your car to go back, but there is no longer a river under the bridge you drove across yesterday. Believe it or not, this is exactly what happened to people in the south of Honduras when Category 5 Hurricane Mitch hit in October 1998. Choluteca Bridge, which the local authorities reconstructed earlier that year, was left in the dry, as the river now flowed around it, not under it. The structure soon became famous online as the Bridge to Nowhere. This waterway shifted its course overnight, but it normally happens over longer spans of time. A river will stop flowing straight when there is even the tiniest change in the landscape around it. Even something as tiny as a mouse can weaken a riverbank. Imagine a family of mice decides to start a home somewhere by the river and digs a cozy hole. Over time, water gets inside this hole and starts washing away any loose soil. Give it a couple of centuries, and the river will now have a bend in this place. And if you're worried about the mice family, don't be, because they moved out a long time before the water flooded their home. Things happen even faster for small streams because, well, their beds are also smaller. The current breaks down stones, the ground takes them in, and voila, a riverbed or bottom is formed. The current is the strongest in the middle of the waterway, and its power directly shapes the riverbed. The water flowing through rivers is full of soil and other particles. All this stuff goes from the spring into the mouth of a river and into Earth's oceans. In some cases, these particles build up at some point, and that's how new beaches, probably including your favorite, are born from fine-grained sand. On the other side of the river, the flow of water is much faster, so this fast-moving current literally slams against the next bank. Then, the process of erosion starts all over again. River erosion is what happens when the flowing water takes away soil. And I have to tell you, things go super fast there. That water is so energetic, it can even carve into rocks, creating a canyon. If the riverbanks consist of loose material, such as humus, that's the soil you plant a flower in, then it is easier for the flowing water to erode it. Rivers in the plains are often wide and slow because there's little resistance from the ground around them. So you don't have to worry about waves tipping over your boat on a flatland river. In the mountains, streams quickly wash away all the surface soil and gravel, revealing the bedrock beneath them. It's tightly bound, so mountain streams are literally set in stone, as they cannot wash away this bedrock. So we have erosion to blame for waterways changing their course, and also mountains and hills. When a stream reaches a mountain or simply a rock, it has two choices: to flow around it or carve its way through it. In flatlands, Rivers don't have any natural competition, so they choose a more winding path. All this twisting and turning increases the river's total length from the source to the mouth. One such example is the mighty Mississippi River in the U.S. It has a lot of curves and bends, which are called meanders. In the last century and a half alone, the Mississippi changed its course several times. The last major case was in 1876 when it left the historic city of Vicksburg in the dry. 2 years later, a team of American engineers came to the area to construct the Yazoo Diversion Canal, which took 25 years to complete. Thanks to it, ships could once again sail to Vicksburg, reviving the town's economy. What happened in this southern U.S. town in the 19th century is an ordinary natural consequence of river erosion. The bends in a waterway grow sharper over time, making the water flow faster. This speeds up erosion, and individual bends slowly start approaching each other to the point they merge. When this happens, the river straightens up overnight, leaving a lake in the form of a horseshoe in the place where the bend was. This newly formed body of water is called an oxbow lake. These still water lakes either dry up, since they're no longer fed by a spring, or they turn into swamps. In some cases, humans use them as water meadows used for agriculture. Lake Shakot in Arkansas is the largest oxbow lake in North America, formed by the Mississippi several centuries ago. The source of the Mississippi is a lake in Minnesota, but a river can also start when two other watercourses become one, or when the water simply bubbles up from under the ground. Even melting snow can feed a river, like the Amazon gets its water from the Andes. Determining the source of a waterway can be tricky, so the debate about whether Amazon or the Nile is longer is still ongoing. What scientists know for certain is that the Amazon carries more water than any other river. 1/5 of all the fresh water that enters Earth's oceans comes from this South American river. When you look at the Amazon River on a map, you'll notice how it flows from Peru to Brazil, that is, from the west to the east. This direction might seem odd when you compare it to the Mississippi, which flows to the south on the map. It's so confusing because you probably know rivers flow down, affected by gravity, but down doesn't automatically mean south. Running water will try to find the easiest route down, so there are no rules in terms of cardinal directions. The Nile River is the best example of this, as it actually flows north into the Mediterranean Sea. Northern Egypt, where all those pyramids are located, is on lower ground than Sudan, where the Nile is formed when the Blue Nile and the White Nile merge. Up in northern Asia and the Mackenzie River in Canada both flow northwest, while the Yellow River in East Asia flows in the same direction as Amazon, to the east into the Pacific Ocean. These major rivers are some of the best examples that a stream doesn't have to flow from the north to the south. Gravity is the only important factor that determines which way a stream will flow, as running water is all the time pulled downwards. The flow of water is faster on steeper slopes. When there's a sudden drop in the flow, waterfalls form. Angel Falls in Venezuela is the highest waterfall on the planet, with water dropping from a height of 2,600 feet. Watch your step. In a waterfall, the falling water can easily reach the speed of a Thompson's gazelle, but as a river approaches the end of its journey, it slows down significantly. The stream doesn't have enough energy to cut into the nearby land. All the sediment it has picked up along the way, such as sandstone, slows it down. At the place where a river meets the ocean or a lake, it gets rid of this sediment along its banks, creating a delta, an area rich in fertile soil. The Ganges in India has the biggest delta in the world, several hundred miles wide and visible from space. The Amazon, on the other side, doesn't have a true delta because the strong currents of the Atlantic Ocean wash away everything the torrent brings. The deepest section of the riverbed that runs along its middle is called a channel. This is where the current is the strongest, so ships travel on top of these channels. When engineers want to expand a waterway, they simply dig a deeper channel and voila, larger ships can now pass. This is just one way humans alter watercourses. We often strengthen the banks of a river to prevent erosion or build dams that stop or divert the flow of water. The oldest operational dam on the planet dates back to the time of Egyptian pharaohs. It was, of course, the first damn thing.
This invisible line divides the world into two parts, and most animals, fish, and birds, for some reason, can't cross it. The line is called the Wallace Line, and it runs between Australia and Asia. It has its name after Alfred Russel Wallace, a British scientist and explorer who discovered it in 1859. He traveled to Asia to explore a group of islands called the Malay Archipelago. As Wallace walked through the jungles, climbed hills, and sailed on boats, he noticed something like an invisible wall. On its west side, in places like Borneo and Sumatra, he saw animals you might find in Asia. There were big rhinos munching on leaves and monkeys swinging from tree to tree. The forests were full of life, with all kinds of animals you'd expect to see in a jungle. But in places like Sulawesi and Lombok, just across the imaginary line he came up with, Wallace found animals more like the ones in Australia and colorful birds like cockatoos. The behaviors of animals differ on different sides of the Wallace Line. Some creatures are great at traveling across tough barriers like water, but others are not. For example, bats can fly across open water, but they sometimes cross the Wallace Line. On the other hand, big animals that live on land like elephants usually stay on just one side of the line. Some birds are shy and like to stay hidden in thick bushes and trees to avoid predators. They wouldn't feel safe flying over wide stretches of water with no place to hide. Plants don't stick to the Wallace Line as strictly as animals do, because they spread in their own unique ways, like with seeds carried by the wind, water, or animals. One plant genus, the eucalyptus, mostly stays on the Australian side, but one eucalyptus tree has made its way to the Philippines on the Asian side. Underwater, the Wallace Line doesn't matter as much. The area between the Wallace Line and Australia is called the Coral Triangle, and it's bursting with life. Now, after more than 150 years, scientists think they finally have an explanation of the Wallace Line mystery. They believe it all started about 35 million years ago, when Australia broke away from Antarctica and slowly moved up to crash into Asia. When this happened, the crash created a chain of islands called the Malay Archipelago between Asia and Australia. This caused extreme changes in the weather, which made the area very different and affected which animals could live there. Researchers used a computer model that looked at how more than 20,000 species of animals from both sides of the Wallace Line would have behaved millions of years ago. When Australia started to drift away from Antarctica, it opened up a huge new era of deep ocean around Antarctica. This is where the biggest ocean current on Earth, called the Antarctic Circumpolar Current, began to flow. This swirling current made the planet's climate much cooler and completely changed how animals could live in different places. But not all animals were affected in the same way. Indonesia stayed warm and rainy, which was perfect for animals from Asia. These creatures could hop from island to island like stepping stones and make their way toward Australia. But animals from Australia had a harder time. Over millions of years, they had gotten used to living in cooler, drier places, so the tropical islands didn't suit them as well. Scientists believe if we can see how animals adapted to big changes in weather patterns millions of years ago, we might be able to predict how today's animals will cope with a similar situation. Other scientists after Wallace also tried to describe and explain the invisible natural border between Asia and Australia, and came up with their lines. The Weber Line, for example, is in a slightly different location than the Wallace Line, between the Oriental and the Australasian faunal regions within Wallacea. It's a group of mainly Indonesian islands that are separated by deep water straits from the Asian and Australian continental shelves. They were never connected to the big continents by land, so animals that could swim, fly, or float across the water made it to these islands. That's why the creatures living there are so unique and come from both Asia and Australia. Weber's line is where the balance tips. If you go one way, most of the animals are from Asia. If you go the other way, most of the animals are from Australia. Another important migration event in the history of our planet happened in the Americas. Around 30 million years ago, South America became a separate landmass as tectonic plates moved and pulled it away from Antarctica and Africa. Once it was on its own, the animals living there started to evolve in unique ways and turned into creatures you couldn't find anywhere else in the world. There were animals we still see today, like opossums, giant rodents like capybaras and chinchillas, armadillos, anteaters, and sloths. Some of the animals from those times are now extinct. There were giant ground sloths, bigger than cars, roaming around. There were glyptodonts, which were like giant armadillos with super tough, bony shells. There were also huge, scary birds that couldn't fly but could chase down their prey. Up in North America, animals could still travel to other parts of the world through the Bering Strait. So North America was full of different animals like deer, bison, horses, camels, and even mammoths and mastodons. They all lived alongside predators like big cats, wolves, and bears. About 3 million years ago, the continents of North and South America got connected by a strip of land called the Isthmus of Panama. It formed because the tectonic plates shifted again. Some major volcanic activity between 25 million years ago also contributed to the process. Animals started to move between North and South America, and this long process went down in history as the Great American Interchange. During the Ice Age, huge glaciers in the north grew and shrank over tens of thousands of years. When the glaciers were at their biggest, they held so much water that the sea levels dropped, and forests probably turned into wide grassy plains. So animals had the perfect conditions to cross over. Giant ground sloths were among the animals that went up north from South America, all the way to Alaska. One special kind even roamed the chilly tundras alongside woolly mammoths and caribou. Lots of North American predators decided to explore the South. There were cats like cougars, jaguars, and saber-toothed tigers with their giant teeth. Wolves, foxes, otters, raccoons, and bears also joined the migration. The short-faced bear could stand up to 13 feet tall and weigh as much as a small car. South America also had some funny-looking animals called sanus, or South American native ungulates. These were hoofed mammals that evolved into all kinds of weird shapes, while South America was isolated. Big animals from North America, for example, relatives of elephants with strange tusks, came to the south and became some of the largest creatures around. The ancestors of today's llamas settled in the Andes Mountains, and deer, tapirs, and peccaries thrived in the forests. Animals kept moving back and forth between the continents for thousands of years. But as the Ice Age ended, many of the bigger animals, like the giant ground sloths, couldn't adapt and disappeared. It seems North American animals were better at adapting to their new homes. You can find armadillos, porcupines, and opossums from South America in North America. But many of South America's most famous animals like jaguars, llamas, and spectacled bears left North America long ago. Scientists think South America's animals, after being isolated for millions of years, had a harder time dealing with new challenges when their ecosystems changed.
1,000 years ago, near modern-day St. Louis, Missouri, there was a vibrant, bustling city called Cahokia. It was a Native American city, the largest and most influential one in Mississippian culture. At its peak, around 1050 BCE, Cahokia was home to as many as 30,000 people, making it larger than Paris at the time. But what's interesting is that Cahokia didn't have any big marketplace. Usually trade was the backbone of any big city, Yet this one stood out for archaeologists. That's because Cahokia wasn't about commerce. It was about culture, community, and parties. The people who lived there threw massive parties that would last for days. The city's grandest feature was its 50-acre plaza, surrounded by amazing earthen pyramids. This massive space could hold over 10,000 people. Imagine them all gathering there for festivities, dancing, drinking coffees and teas, feasting on deer, and betting on sports. The events were super lively. Cahokians would wear awesome costumes, style their hair in interesting ways, and decorate their bodies with tattoos. Athletes were playing a game called Chunky, where they hurled spears at a rolling stone disc, competing to get as close as possible. The roar of the crowd filled the air, and performers showed off their skills. These celebrations were so wild, they left traces in history. After the parties ended, Cahokians cleaned up by tossing leftovers into pits. Archaeologists have uncovered these waste pits, and they were filled with food remains and pottery. One pit alone contained the remains of 2,000 deer, and that's from a single event. They also found traces of yaupon holly, a caffeinated plant that was traded from hundreds of miles away. This just shows how much effort and thought Cahokians put in their celebrations. Would you like to live in a city like this? But aside from all the fun and games, Cahokia was also deeply complex and spiritual. The city was built on a landscape that mixed dry land with swampy patches. Many people believe that this symbolized the connection between the world of the living and the dead. The people of Cahokia saw their city as a bridge between these two realms. They built earthen mounds, both for ceremonies and rituals, and as construction support. These mounds rose from the swampy areas. Meanwhile, people settled in the drier spots. Elevated pathways connected these neighborhoods, creating a physical link between life and death. Isn't it sad that some ancient metropolises that rival modern cities in scale just disappeared? Cahokia's story came to a quiet end around 1350 CE, when the city was abandoned, all due to changes in environments and weather, floods, and other problems. But the influence of Cahokia was so big, it spread to distant places. Some of their traditions, like Chunky and Yaupon tea, have survived in native communities to this day. Today, Cahokia is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and it's not the only megacity we lost. About 5,000 years ago, people in the Indus Valley built some of the world's first cities. Mohenjo-Daro was an ancient city in what is now Pakistan. The city was built around 2500 BCE, and back then, it was a thriving hub of the Indus civilization. Sure, it was much smaller than modern cities, but it was quite huge at the time, around 40,000 inhabitants. It looks like the locals were crazily strict and disciplined people. The city's planning and organization were incredible. It was laid out in a grid pattern. Streets and important buildings aligned along the north-south axis, probably to match the movement of the sun and moon. They also built one of the most advanced systems for water and waste management of their time. The city had about 700 wells. Nearly every house had its own. Most homes also had private bathrooms with drainages and even underground sewers. This shows how skilled these people were at staying clean. And with all this discipline, it looks like there were no kings, queens, or even a central government. They could still have some authority, like local elites or elected officials, just not a classic strict monarchy or religion. Instead, people there cared about simplicity and order. They basically managed themselves, having standardized ways of doing things, from the way tools and potteries were made to how they traded. Which is why, unlike many other cities, Mohenjo-Daro didn't have grand palaces, temples, or monuments. Instead, they had public areas known as citadels. People gathered at citadels for rituals, meetings, and storage of grain. And it seems like this way of life worked perfectly. Scientists found some seals and weights, which means the economy was well regulated. Archaeologists found some intricate artifacts like ivory, lapis lazuli, carnelian beads, and gold jewelry. Another famous find is the small bronze statue known as the Dancing Girl, which was discovered in 1926. Mohenjo-Daro wasn't poor at all. And they also pulled off some awesome buildings. Staying clean was clearly way more important to them than displays of wealth or power. So they created the Great Bath, one of the most famous structures in the city. It's a large, watertight pool built with baked bricks, perched on a mound of earth, being almost a religious place, the closest thing they had to a temple. Meanwhile, the city itself was built on a series of mounds. They grew taller over the centuries as people added new houses and structures. Why did the city fail? No one really knows. There's something mysterious about the sculptures archaeologists found. Many of them seemed intentionally broken. This means the city's later inhabitants, maybe invaders or something, destroyed them for some reason. Some scientists think that the Indus River may have shifted course, disrupting agriculture and trade. But there's no evidence of a flood or any big event like this. It just seems like, over time, the entire Indus civilization just gradually faded away. By 1900 BCE, the culture had shifted and didn't leave much behind. Let me tell you now about the ancient city of Kos, which is located where the modern town of Kos now stands in Greece. Imagine arriving by sea, and the first thing that hits you is the sheer grandeur of its agora, this massive public square built with stones in different colors, laid out on terraces that rise above you. It was one of the biggest in the ancient world, and it made a great impression on anyone approaching the city. This place has a rich history, dating back to around 2300 to 2200 BCE. A long time ago, local folk gathered up from different parts of the island to form a new city in the northeast. People have lived there since the Bronze Age, and over time, it became a super important center of culture and trade. And no wonder, since it's right near a natural harbor. The harbor was sheltered by two breakwaters, and people built some of the most important religious sites there, including the sanctuaries of Aphrodite and Hercules. Kos wasn't just beautiful, though. It had some brilliant design. The whole city was laid out in a neat grid, with streets crossing each other at perfect right angles, literally looking almost like a modern city. Thanks to this, moving around was super easy, and the blocks, or insulae, were big enough to fit several large houses. Kos remained largely unchanged until the 6th century CE. Over time, it started gradually shrinking in size, confined within the walls of what is now the Chora neighborhood. Meanwhile, Palmyra was an ancient city built around a beautiful oasis sometime around the 3rd millennium BCE. Originally known as Tadmor, this city flourished as a major stop on the Silk Road, linking the Near East with Asia. It was a thriving center of trade and culture. They had a marketplace, assembly buildings, grand gates. In other words, this place was bustling with life. The city has been through many hands throughout its history, from the Byzantine to Arab caliphates, which is probably why it had some awesome architecture. An interesting blend of Greco-Roman, Persian, and Arabic vibes. The Temple of Bel, the Great Colonnade, and a Roman-style theater. But, like all the others, it decayed over time. Palmyra's importance faded, and by the early 1400s, it had been largely destroyed. but at least its ruins remain. Right now, they're a UNESCO World Heritage Site.
You're standing in the middle of a vast, empty desert in Saudi Arabia. But in the middle of that emptiness, two enormous mirrored skyscrapers rise side by side, in perfect parallel to each other. This isn't just some sci-fi concept, it's the Line, the centerpiece of Saudi Arabia's boldest urban project yet. Now, Saudi Arabia is already home to some of the most ambitious architecture in the world, from Riyadh's King Abdullah Financial District to the iconic Abraj Al Bayt Towers in Mecca. They've been working hard for years. But the Line is in a league of its own. This project was announced in 2021, and it is part of a larger vision for the country's future called NEOM, a $500 billion mega project designed to redefine how people live, work, and interact with the environment. I mean, what could go wrong, right? Well, I don't know. But Nadmi Al Nasser, the longtime chief executive of the ambitious project, has recently departed. Suspicious. Even more so because NEOM's statement issued soon after did not give any plausible reason for his departure. Then, the Line project itself was originally expected to cost around $200 billion. But by 2024, that number had skyrocketed to a mind-blowing $2 trillion. That's about twice Saudi Arabia's entire GDP. And if you ask independent experts, they think it could end up costing even more. At first, the plan was to build about 10 miles of the project and have 1.5 million people living there by 2030. By now, the expectations are way more modest. Only just under 1.5 miles are likely to be done by 2030, with fewer than 300,000 residents. The project has come across a lot of problems along the way. Engineering issues and management problems have caused major delays, and progress hasn't been as fast as hoped. And now, let's figure out what exactly is the Line. It's a literal city made up of two parallel skyscrapers, each towering 1,640 feet high. That's higher than almost all the tallest skyscrapers in the world. These skyscrapers are 656 feet wide and stretch for a mind-boggling 106 miles across the northwest of Saudi Arabia, right near the Red Sea. The most astounding thing? The entire city is actually within this one structure. There are no cars, no roads, no emissions. But we'll go into detail a bit later. The complex is supposed to house 9 million people, and all of this running entirely on clean energy. Such a project aligns perfectly with Saudi Arabia's ambitious Vision 2030 plan. The outside of the skyscrapers will be covered in mirrors that will reflect the surrounding desert landscape, creating an almost seamless blend between the city and its surroundings. Inside, there will be lush parks, cascading waterfalls, flying taxis, and even robot helpers to take care of everyday tasks. They're also planning to make an artificial moon as part of the city's design. One more thing that makes the Line so unique is its design. Unlike traditional cities that spread out horizontally, the Line is vertical. Everything, homes, offices, parks, schools, shopping centers, are stacked on top of each other in layers. This means that residents won't need to travel long distances to get what they need. In fact, the designers promise that all amenities will be within a 5-minute walk from anywhere in the city. And while it's compact in width, the city's vertically layered structure means it can comfortably fit all 9 million residents, while leaving plenty of room for parks, natural spaces, and modern conveniences. There's even a plan for year-round climate control, keeping both indoor and outdoor spaces at comfortable temperatures, no matter how harsh the desert weather gets. Of course, even with everything close by, people will still need to get around the city. Worry not, the Line has it covered in the most futuristic way possible. It features a high-speed train system that will travel from one end of the city to the other in just 20 minutes. That's 106 miles in 20 minutes with only 4 stops along the way. Imagine being able to get anywhere in the city faster than you could drive across town in most places today. Besides the train, the line will also have autonomous vehicles. Those will be cars and shuttles driving themselves with the help of advanced technology. They will handle everything from parking to going around obstacles. Even cooler, in the line, every car, train, and any other piece of infrastructure will be connected in a huge network called the Internet of Things. Sensors and real-time data will allow traffic to flow smoothly, preventing delays and reducing congestion. They first spoke about the NEOM project in 2017. Besides the line, NEOM is supposed to include an octagon-shaped floating industrial city and a posh mountain ski resort. There, Saudi Arabia will host the Asian Winter Games in 2029. Plus, there will be the world's largest green energy plant, which will make the region self-sufficient and sustainable. The goal of NEOM is to attract people from around the world, not just to visit, but to live there. Residents will even be given their own identity, Neomians. Not everyone thinks this construction is a good idea. Some urban planners and architects have pointed out pretty big flaws in the city's straight-line layout. You see, in a regular city like Johannesburg, which covers way more ground than the line, two random people are usually only about 20 miles apart. But in the line, the average distance between two random people would be 35 miles. That's almost double, even though the line's overall area is way smaller. This setup could make it harder for people to connect socially and might be a pain to navigate, even with a high-speed train zipping through it. Now, they promise that every resident will have everything they need within a 5-minute walk, but there are doubts too. People wonder if living in a super compact, stacked-up design might end up feeling claustrophobic or even too much to handle. As for the whole mirrored exterior idea, it looks pretty cool in renderings. But there's an opinion it could actually mess with the environment. Reflecting all that sunlight in a desert might disturb local wildlife or create unexpected heat issues. The line's high-tech features sound amazing, but they come with their own set of headaches. The city is supposed to run on the Internet of Things tech and autonomous vehicles. Sounds awesome, right? But how are they going to pull that off for a 106-mile-long city? For things to run smoothly, every piece of tech, cars, trains, infrastructure, needs to be perfectly in sync, sharing tons of real-time data. If there's even a tiny glitch, it could throw a wrench into daily life for millions of people. Then there's that high-speed train. It does sound like a dream, but actually building and keeping it running in the middle of a desert is not so easy. The heat, shifting sands, and wear and tear on the tracks could cause big delays and rack up costs pretty quickly. People around the world are questioning if the line is even doable. The first inhabitants were supposed to start living there by 2030, but there are reports about scaling the project back, so that deadline feels like a big stretch. There's also a sustainability issue. The line is supposed to have zero emissions and 100% clean energy. But building something so massive is bound to take tons of resources. With all these challenges, Saudi Arabia is looking into new ways to fund the line and figure out which parts of their Vision 2030 projects to prioritize. An insider has recently said that some projects might go ahead as planned, while others could be delayed or scaled down. This lines up with what Ali Shahabi, who's on NEOM's advisory board, has said. He admitted that the Vision 2030 goals were always meant to be super ambitious. Like, almost too ambitious. But he argued that even if they only pull off part of it in time, it'll still be a big deal.